Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye coverage of the 2014 elections continues with an interview with Assembly Speaker Robin Vos. He's a Republican from Burlington. He's seeking re-election in his 63rd Assembly District. Mr. Speaker, welcome back to Wisconsin Eye.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And a programming note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Before we get to some of the issues questions, I want to ask you about three recent developments.
Okay.
Last week, State Senate Democratic leader Chris Larson sat in that chair and called it pay to play for Gogebic Taconite to contribute $700,000 to a third-party group that helped Governor Walker survive the recall and helped some Republican senators. I want to give you a chance to respond to pay to play, because he noted then that one of the first bills to pass last session changed the mining rules and regs. Response to pay to play?
Well, it's just a bunch of baloney. First of all, I think all of us have been in support of doing whatever we can to create more jobs in Wisconsin. Knowing that we have a large iron ore deposit, I actually have been involved in the topic, at least discussing it, for well over probably a decade now, almost since the beginning of my tenure, with the people who've owned the property, talking about the need at some point to be able to have this valuable resource put into use. So it's not something new. I think that has nothing to do with what's actually happening up in northern Wisconsin. I think it's all about Chris Larson, and unfortunately being able to say anything just to try to get some kind of story headline. I think it's a sad commentary on where he is politically. I also think that, just like I do not believe that simply because he takes massive donations and probably knows where they're going from the Greater Wisconsin Committee and all these different organizations, I don't think it changes what he believes. I think that for the most part, Chris Larson is an ardent liberal Democrat, believes in bigger government, more spending, higher taxes, and then organizations that have the same belief are going to fund his campaign to make sure that his beliefs become part of the world. I think it's no surprise that a company like Gogebic looks and says, we want to have a legislature that's open-minded, since Democrats aren't even really willing to partake in the process. They fund an organization to help elect people who believe what they do. That's democracy. That's freedom.
Were you surprised at the news last week that that $700,000 gift or donation was made, Mr. Speaker?
Yeah, I had no idea about it, obviously.
Okay. Secondly, there's been a recent bunch of disclosures as a result of the John Doe-related activities. You said once you would look at revising John Doe laws. Do you still believe John Doe laws need to be changed? If you come back as Speaker, would you push for a change in those? How should those be changed, sir?
Well, and as I've said, I think that the whole process really has done a disservice to the justice system. You know, first of all, a John Doe is supposed to be secret. So that way you have an actual fact finding, so we do not try and make people guilty in the press or by innuendo and by rumor. Well, that's exactly what happened in this process. We had two different judges who said that the information that's in the process was so prejudicial, but they wanted it sealed so it didn't create this appearance of some kind of impropriety when none existed. Well, lo and behold, here we are with leaked documents that were done supposedly by accident, and on top of the fact that we have people who are willing to say and do anything because they think that winning an election is more important than following the law, because anything that comes out is breaking the law. So I think that either we have a process where it is much more like other states, where it's not secret, people can actually know what's going on, they have a right to defend themselves and not be tried in the public, or we have a kangaroo court, which is really what this John Doe process has become. So I'm not a lawyer, I don't know what the final answer should be, but I look at how this has occurred and say that under any set of fair circumstances, it's not working. So I'd like to at least look and say maybe there's a better process, maybe there isn't, and this is the best we can hope for, but I certainly think it's not something we should be proud of.
Do you think these recent disclosures have hurt Governor Walker's bid for re-election, sir?
I think for the most part they're kind of already built into the process. Most people know that Governor Walker's a man of integrity. If you support him, you believe that it's a political witch hunt, like I do. If for some reason you hate Governor Walker and what Republicans have done, it doesn't matter who says it or why they say it, you're going to believe whatever lies are put out there. So I guess I think for the most part, it's not. Do I think that it's the way that I would want to be portrayed if I were running for re-election? Of course not, because the Journal-Sentinel has really been sensationalizing a lot of these things, coming from the fact that, number one, it was supposed to be a secret probe. Number two, the documents were leaked accidentally. And number three, we've had two different judges that said they should be sealed. But it seems to none of that matter, which is why there's just this constant churning where, things aren't even important. Now, one of the things that's not out there that really should be is that there is nobody who says that Governor Walker was involved in raising money for his own campaign to some kind of collusion. The fact is they're alleging that he raised money to help defend the state Senate Republicans during the recall. Well, he did. That's not a surprise. It's not against the law. He wanted to keep people who support his position in the ability to help make sure that his agenda moves forward. That's not a surprise. So I just think it's a red herring, number one, and it's really being done once again where people are willing to lie and to create false innuendos just to win an election. And I think it's a sad commentary on where Democrats are today.
And then finally, the Department of Revenue statement that they're $281 million short, and that's the initial estimate in the last fiscal year. How big a problem is that?
Well, I don't view it as a problem for two reasons. Number one, it's showing that when we have extra money in Wisconsin, rather than keeping it in Madison to spend later, we're going to return it to taxpayers, and that helps grow our economy. It's why sales tax revenues were up, which is the indicator of consumer spending. We know personal income growth is higher in Wisconsin than in most other Midwest states. And I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is we only have one of a 2-year budget done, and it's in balance, and it's actually still got a surplus. So the point of us having a rainy day fund is if for some reason things go bad or the economy turns, we have money set aside. If not, our budget is still in balance, and that's what we should be focusing on, not some projected deficit if we don't cut spending. And trust me, Republicans know how to cut spending to make sure our budget stays in balance. Democrats know how to raise taxes to balance theirs. Well, we're going to choose the first, not the latter.
It's too early to talk about a budget fix-up bill then, right?
Of course,
Mr.
yeah,
Speaker?
not even close. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about funding schools in the next biennial budget. As a former co-chairman of the Joint Finance Committee, do you think, in light of some of the new budget constraints, I didn't say the D word, deficit, do you think there will be new money for schools in the next biennium?
Of course there will.
There will be.
Yeah, with the exception of the huge deficit we faced when we came into office, where we gave the tools to really allow school districts to balance their budgets. More money has gone into education during the 20 years that Republicans have been in power than any other time, if you look at it. We have put money into schools every cycle but one, and I think it's important to know that last time around we still prioritized school spending with increases all across Wisconsin. So why we would not do that in the next time, I can't see why we wouldn't. If for some reason we have some sort of an economic downturn, we'll have to address it. But to me, there's no more important place to spend money than on making sure we have good education and reasonable property taxes. Those are two of our highest priorities, and they always will be.
Vouchers and choice. Is your number one priority taking that 1,000 cap off and statewide in the next
It's not my number one priority, but it's certainly a priority. My number one priority is passing an accountability bill so that every single school, be it public, private, charter, choice that receives taxpayer funding, will have to have the same set of rules to live under as far as testing students and making sure that a parent knows whether or not kids are doing well or they're not succeeding. That's my number one priority. Making sure we have more money for schools and ensuring that we have property tax limits on that are reasonable, that allow for us to have good schools but also reasonable taxes to live in a home. That's my number two priority. But expanding choice, I've always been a supporter of that. I don't know why we would not want to let every single mom and dad across the state say, I'm going to choose the very best school for my kids, regardless of where it is, which we have open enrollment now, so you can go across districts, you can go across boundaries right now because it's about the kids, not about the parents. And that's where I think we should be with choice. If there's a better school that's 10 miles away or 2 blocks away that's a choice school as opposed to a public school, why wouldn't we want to give them that chance? Especially if they're under the same accountability rules as far as making sure kids are doing well. It seems to me to make perfect sense.
Since the last time we talked, Governor Walker formally asked your House and the Senate to withdraw or repeal Common Core. How, if you're Speaker again, how are you going to proceed on that issue, sir?
Well, if you remember last time I formed a Speaker's Task Force on Common Core. They came up with recommendations which we were prepared to advance, which couldn't get through the state Senate. I think the idea of standards is one that we should all rally around. I do not have a problem with ensuring that children who go to school have a certain set of standards when they graduate from 2nd grade or 10th grade or from high school, whatever grade they're in. But I do think that having the rules be set by Washington with no public input, remember the process that Tony behaviors undertook had no input from educators, had no input from elected officials or school board members or parents. I don't think that's the right way to develop the standards. I know that some things under Common Core are heading in completely the wrong direction. Now, it's not necessarily because of Common Core, but it's because they started that process. There are schools in Wisconsin right now that want to eliminate grades and just have every student be pass-fail. They say that that's a better way to establish mastery of standards. I don't agree with that concept. I think that we need to have some kids that succeed, some kids that aren't doing so well, so we know who they are and we can push them to succeed so every child does well. That's what Common Core is supposed to be. But I think that in many ways it's been perverted by the left to be one where grades shouldn't matter and to make sure that we have everybody the same. That's not what advancing our standards should be about. So we're going to come back. We're going to have a vigorous process to establish a Wisconsin-based set of standards so that we know that every single child who graduates from high school has a basic mastery of certain things. And that we make sure that we have kids all throughout the process who, if they're failing, we give them extra tools to succeed, but they're ultimately held accountable for whether they know or don't know certain things.
Healthcare in the next budget. Pennsylvania, you may have noticed, just last week announced that they're going to take the federal expansion money but use it to buy health care from private insurance companies. Is that an option that's even being talked about here in Wisconsin, Mr. Speaker?
No, and here's the irony of it. Governor Walker has formed a perfect solution to deal with Obamacare, right? When Barack Obama passed Obamacare, he said that it was going to help insurance be delivered to private citizens through the private marketplace, okay? Well, I doubted that was going to happen, and I think we've now found it's true. I've had people, and I've actually looked at it myself, where without the taxpayer subsidies, the plans on the exchange are more expensive than they are in the private sector. So that's not fulfilling the goal of what they said it was going to reduce healthcare costs. But for people who are in poverty, where they do get that subsidy from the federal government, the plans are actually less expensive than they would see in the public sector. So if you're a person who's on Medicaid and you're at 101% of poverty, asking you to pay $4 or $5 a week for pretty good coverage is not something that I think we shouldn't shy away from. I think that asking people to have some skin in the game, $5 a week to buy health insurance, is not too much. Now, Democrats would prefer it to be free for everybody. Well, we can't afford that. We've got to prioritize our spending. And I know that in the end, I do not believe the federal government is going to keep their word. They have it in almost every single program that they've saddled states with, from special education to Medicaid in general. Because remember, Medicaid, the reimbursement rate for Medicaid is about 60-40. But just this last year, they reduced the amount of reimbursement for the state of Wisconsin because we had higher personal income growth than a whole lot of the rest of the country. So they've already cut the Medicaid money that they give us, and now we're supposed to believe that they'll be at 100% funding forever. It's just not going to happen. So we have a system where everybody who's poor gets the coverage, and everybody who's above poverty can go into the exchange either with a subsidy, or if they make enough, they don't get one. That's a pretty good compromise to me. But once again, just like I said earlier in the show, Democrats are so obsessed with the politics of it, they can't look at the policy and say, here's a way for Republicans and Democrats to come together and actually find an answer that says, poor people, free coverage, above poverty, paying a little, all the way up to full price. That should be the marketplace. Transportation
funding. The Taxpayers Alliance said, if you fund transportation statewide at 2013 levels for 10 years, you're $2 billion short. Do you buy into that number? And isn't transportation funding might be the biggest difficult issue that's got to be resolved in the next budget, Mr. Speaker?
I do agree. Well, it's one of the biggest difficult issues, I agree. Transportation has been underfunded for a while. There are certain things that we tried to do in the last budget that I would hope we would come back and address again. Transit, which is funded out of the Transportation Fund, I think that should be funded out of the General Fund, just like we proposed the last time. I think if you look at things like the State Patrol, that is a law enforcement function. It's paid for by the gas tax. I don't know why that would be. We don't fund any other police department in the state by the gas tax. I think that we need to look at some possible revenue options. My favorite one, of course, is tolling.
But you've said that's years off.
It is.
You have to change federal law.
That's true.
Excuse me for
No, that's okay. I mean, it is true. But that's where we need to look and say, what's our long-term solution? What are our possible short-term solutions? You know, we have to look and say, are there other ways that we can help reduce spending as far as getting rid of waste and inefficiency inside the department? I know Secretary Gottlieb, and I trust him, and I think he's done a really good job of trying to root out ways to save money. So I'm always open to more, but I think that's a difficult situation. So we need to have an honest conversation, because to me, there is no more important economic driver than ensuring we have good roads for people to get to work and for goods to get to market. And if that means we need to figure out ways to put more money into the Transportation Fund, we will.
Gas tax not raised since 2006, $75 license plate fee not raised since 2008. You willing to consider uppers in those?
Well, I'm not really interested in increasing the gas tax, to be quite honest, but I will look at all possibilities. If Governor Walker comes up with a plan that he says, look, we're going to reduce taxes in one area, offset them by an increase here, so at the end people pay lower taxes than they do today, I'm not opposed to that concept. So I want to wait and see what he proposes. But I don't want to just go in there and start saying we're going to increase taxes, even though people would want to do that. So we have to take it one step at a time.
A regional issue. The Milwaukee Bucks need a new arena to keep their contract. Mm-hmm. Should there be any type of state aid in any package that leads to the construction of a new arena?
Look, I think the Bucks are a major economic development engine for southeastern Wisconsin. Having any kind of a professional team, if it's the Brewers, the Packers, the Badgers at the college level, they're all important economic drivers. Honestly, I think the Bucks are nowhere near as important to Wisconsin as the Brewers or the Packers are, but I certainly don't want them to leave. Just like we would not want any business to leave Wisconsin. They have an economic impact. Well, what is that economic impact? How much would be lost by the state of Wisconsin in general fund revenue? How much would be lost in sales tax revenue? How much would be lost at the local level if for some reason the Bucks went to a different place? So I am definitely open to saying we would do the same thing for them that we would do for any other private sector business who came to us and said, look, we need some incentives to compete. We need to have a better facility in order to keep the jobs in Wisconsin. I would be definitely open to that, and in fact, that's what we have done. So I think it's a little preliminary to say, here's the plan, since they haven't even told us where this facility would be, what it would cost, how they would find partners to make sure it all works. But does the state of Wisconsin have a role in keeping every business in Wisconsin? You bet it does.
What about the concept of a super TIF where sales taxes and any other taxes generated within that district would go to help pay for an arena?
Yeah, I'm not real interested in a super TIF because the problem is once you do it for a single entity, how are you not going to do it for every other worthy project in every part of Wisconsin? And I just don't think that at a time when we need revenues at the state to pay for transportation, to pay for education, to keep funding Medicaid, that having us have fewer resources is always a challenge unless they're targeted at broader economic development, which is why I support broad-based tax cuts, trying to make sure that we incentivize job creation. I don't know if a super TIF necessarily does that in such a small, targeted way.
There'll certainly be another bill to legalize medical marijuana, and that travels now with the issue of Colorado and state of Washington legalizing the recreational use of marijuana. Mm-hmm. Your feelings on both those?
I do not support legalization of marijuana for recreational use, period. I just think that data is in a bad place, that we are trying to use anecdotes to make public policy. That's not a good way to do it. As you know, we already in the legislature passed a bill which allows CBD oil, which is a extract of marijuana, mm-hmm. Non-hallucinogenic. I'll be honest and say I've thought about this, and I go back and forth because I certainly do not ever want to have legalization of marijuana. I just think that it is not something that you can use for a couple hours and then go to work. It stays in your system for days potentially. You can't go to work high, so it means people are going to be a lot less productive versus having a drink where you can obviously have one drink and still be fully functional. You can't have one joint and be fully functional. But in medical situations where a doctor has a prescription, I don't view medical marijuana any differently than I would using codeine or a painkiller if it can be medically efficacious. So if it's a real doctor having a process where they prescribe it no different than going to Walgreens to get your other drugs, I don't have a problem with it. Should Wisconsin be one of the only places in the country? Probably not. So in theory, I don't have a problem with medical marijuana nationwide as long as it's controlled just like every other medical substance is. But having it one state at a time dispensed by somebody who's not licensed or obviously doesn't have the medical background to be able to dispense that, that's nothing but recreational marijuana kind of hidden as medical. So I don't necessarily support that idea.
It was an issue in the primary for Attorney General. Give us again your position on first offense drunken driving. Is it really a dollars and cents issue?
Yeah.
Mr. Schimmel says if we're going to do it, we ought to be aware of the cost all the way up and down the line. So,
yeah, District Attorney Schimmel is exactly right. Look, Wisconsin has always been a state where drinking is a part of the culture. So having that means we have extra responsibilities to make sure that when people break the law, there are harsh penalties. In Wisconsin, a first-time drunk driving offense is pretty severe. The rules of what happens to somebody are similar to what they are in other states, even though they call it something different. So I think it's important for us to realize that since we passed some changes in drunk driving during the, not the previous session, but the one before, mm-hmm. drunk driving arrests have gone down. That's a good thing. We have seen that people are having less fatalities with drunk driving. That's a good thing. So I think that we need to reward ourselves in a way of saying, let's look at where we are to make sure that we have the right priorities in place and spend our money efficaciously. We're not doing that if we just say we're going to lock everybody up and figure out how the state pays for the cost.
And then finally, a chance to highlight differences between you and your Democratic opponent on November 4.
You know, I don't know Andy all that well. I've watched his Wisconsin Eye interview, so thanks for doing that. I met him very briefly at the county fair. I said hello, and we kind of walked by each other. I'm sure he means well. So I give him credit for running for office. It's never easy talking to people, having to state your position out there. I think he just has a different vision for where Racine County should be. He made the point that he thinks I'm a career politician. Well, I don't think I am, especially considering the fact that I have multiple businesses. I don't intend to have this be my lifelong career. I didn't get elected, until I was in my mid-30s, so I didn't start out as some young teenager. But at the same point, I think his belief is structured around having government be the ones who better can make decisions than we do. I just fundamentally disagree with that. If I look at my district, I think most people want strong schools, good jobs, a community that they can be proud of, and to be able to make their own decisions on things that impact themselves and their family. And I think that's basically where Republicans are. It's where I'm proud to stand. I feel good about November. I've done doors all summer long. I've gotten a pretty good vote in my primary. I was aiming for 90%. I got 89.5%, so that's pretty close. But I think at the end of the day, I feel good about where we are. I'm looking forward to next session, and I wish nothing but the best for Andy in his future, hopefully after I beat him.
Thank you. Assembly Speaker Robin Voss of Burlington is a Republican seeking re-election in the 63rd Assembly District. The election is November 4. Mr. Speaker, thanks for talking to Wisconsin.
Thanks, Steve. I always enjoy it.
Thank you.